Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise tonight at adjournment proceedings to pursue a question that I initially asked earlier this year. I asked the question on February 17th, and it relates to the current debate, Bill C-51, the so-called Anti-Terrorism Act, but it's actually an omnibus bill with a much larger title and much longer title, 5 bills rolled into one. The Prime Minister did me the courtesy of actually responding to my question and said this, that, quote, and this was his entire response, Mr. Speaker. He said, "I think it is very well known that the Anti-Terrorism Act 2015 is designed to deal with the promotion and actual execution of terrorist activities and not other lawful activities." Now, having heard that very sensible sentence from the Prime Minister, now let me tell you what the question was and why the Prime Minister's response formed no answer at all. What I have been trying to ascertain from the Minister of Public Safety, from the Minister of Justice, and indeed from the Prime Minister, is how this bill will affect dissent in this country if it should fall outside of the modifying word lawful. And we'll find that phrase, Mr. Speaker, in the bill, in Part 1, following a great long list, which I must emphasize, in describing activities that undermine the security of Canada. The list that is provided in that section from A to I is not an exhaustive list. It comes under a list that has the preface, including any of the following activities, including any of the following. It's not exclusively just this list of activities, but they're quite overbroad in their definition. A, for example, is interference with the capability of the Government of Canada in relation to intelligence, defence, border operations, public safety, the administration of justice, diplomatic or consular relations, or the economic or financial stability of Canada. It goes on from there to list interference with critical infrastructure, but this is just a list. It could be almost anything. Now, at the end of this list comes this phrase, for greater certainty. It does not include lawful advocacy, protest, dissent, and artistic expression. What I have been trying to point out, as I said on 3 occasions in question period when my questions were responded to by the Minister of Justice, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Prime Minister, is how will that phrase protect the kind of dissent which falls outside the word lawful, such as an activity that doesn't have a permit, such as, Mr. Speaker, an activity that is a conscious and deliberate decision to conduct non-violent civil disobedience, knowing that the activity is not lawful, knowing that you may be arrested, but also knowing that you have no intention whatsoever to do anything violent or a threat to anyone except to make a statement of conscience, such as when Rosa Parks sat down in the whites-only section of the bus. That was illegal, and under this language, we're in trouble. Mr. Speaker, in 2001, when the previous government first put forward an Anti-Terrorism Act in response to 9/11, this same debate took place. The word lawful appeared as a modifier in front of protest, and it took then Minister of Justice Anne McClellan some considerable time to agree with the opposition that the word lawful would make illegal wildcat strikes the subject of security and intelligence operations. The word lawful should be removed from C-51, and I wonder when Conservatives will understand the question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will attempt to respond to the member's question, although I think it's fairly straightforward and understandable, and it's in the notes here, but I'm surprised that she wouldn't actually realize it. The international jihadist movement, Mr. Speaker, has declared war on Canada, and Canadians are being targeted by jihadist terrorists simply because they hate our society and the values that we hold dear. We reject the argument that every time we talk about security, our freedoms are threatened. Canadians understand that their freedom and security go hand in hand. Canadians expect us to protect both, and there are safeguards in this legislation to do exactly that. The fundamental fact that our police and national security agencies are working to protect our rights and freedoms, and it is jihadist terrorists who endanger our security and want to take away those very rights and freedoms. Under our government, Canada is not sitting on the sidelines, as the Liberals and NDP would have us do, and instead we're joining our allies in the international coalition to fight ISIL. I'd like to take this opportunity to dispel some serious misconceptions about the important bill. First, the definition of activities that undermine the security of Canada applies only to Part 1 of Bill C-51, which enacts the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act. Under the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act, information could only be shared if it relates to a specific activity that undermines the sovereignty, security, or territorial integrity of Canada, or the lives or the security of the people of Canada. Information that meets this threshold may only be shared if it is relevant to the recipient organization's jurisdiction or responsibilities for national security. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, national security. The Security of Canada Information Sharing Act notes, for clarity, that lawful advocacy, protest, dissent, and artistic expression do not fall within the definition of activities that undermine the security of Canada. Even if some activities of advocacy, some that the very member spoke about, protest, dissent, or artistic expression are unlawful, if they violate the criminal code, they would also need to have a national security impact to qualify. So in addition to being criminal, Mr. Speaker, they would actually need to undermine the sovereignty, security, or territorial integrity of Canada. As Rosa Parks did in sitting in her seat, while it may at the time have been deemed unlawful, it certainly wouldn't have met any of those three thresholds, Mr. Speaker. The Act does not authorize any new collection or use of personal information. Recipient institutions are still limited by their lawful mandates in the collection and use of information, including information received under the Act. The Act, Mr. Speaker, does not override specific limitations respecting collection or sharing of information in recipient institution statutes. Mr. Speaker, Part 4 of Bill C-51 amends the CSIS Act. This is not linked to the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act. In fact, Part 4 of the bill mandates that CSIS mandates CSIS to disrupt threats to the security of Canada. The concept of a threat to security of Canada is clearly defined in the Act and includes terrorism, espionage, sabotage, and foreign influenced activities. It also includes, Mr. Speaker, violent or unlawful covert acts to overthrow our system of government.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, once again, Mr. Speaker, I'm dismayed that the point that the word lawful was removed in 2001 because it inevitably does include nonviolent civil disobedience, wildcat strikes, and perhaps events that take place without a permit. The language to which the parliamentary secretary referred is the very definition that I just read out that numerous legal experts, including 100 law professors in this country, 4 former prime ministers and 5 former Supreme Court justices, have said is vague and overbroad, and which in particular the privacy commissioner for this country has said will actually blow a hole through privacy rights. And that's why it's a very, very scandalous reality that the privacy commissioner is not allowed to testify to the C-51 public safety hearings, which are taking place just now. I will also add, for anyone listening, this Act allows the sharing of information to any person for any purpose. This is a dangerous provision as information sharing, and it should be removed.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we could stand here and do this all day and all night. The fact is, it's clear the member is trying to find specific issues. I've relate back. She gave an example. I stated the example actually in this case. It was an American example of Rosa Parks, would certainly not have been arrested underneath any kind of conspiracy, any kind of national security act. She knows it. Instead, I would love to hear her speak about the issues of national security, what we face here in this country from a jihadist movement that has actually acted here in Canada on 2 occasions that we know. We've prevented other terrorist activities from happening. What I would like to hear from her, instead of getting into the intangibles of the legislation, which is clear she may have her opinion on, as to whether or not she actually supports the direction this government is moving in, because that's certainly the direction that most Canadians believe we should be moving in, Mr. Speaker.